Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 14th Discovery Workshop focused on policy. We are so excited to have you here with us today. We have an incredible panel, and throughout our Discovery Workshop process, policy has come up almost in every single one. And so just excited to be having this conversation. My name is Candy Castellanos, and I am here with Ariel Sullivan, and we are facilitating this project. We'll be going through a quick overview of the project itself, introducing our wonderful panelists, and going through our questions, and then getting started. Today is a little bit different. We are live streaming at the BPI Summit, and so we've got a hybrid audience. We've got live audience members, and we have members in this wonderful Zoom space. So welcome, everyone. Great to see everybody. And as you get started, for those of you joining us on Zoom, if you could change your name to reflect your name, your title, your organization. This is a community building space, and it's always great to see who is with us. So as you come in, please change your name, and we will have a live Q&A at the end of today's session. And so we'll be starting with our panelists and the panelist questions, and then there will be plenty of opportunities to ask questions both from the live audience at the BPI Summit as well as the audience within Zoom. And so as we go, I'm sure lots of different questions will come up. For those of you who are in the live audience, take notes as you go. And for those of you in the Zoom audience, feel free to just ask your questions in the chat. And so we will be keeping track of that, and we'll bring that into our live Q&A at the end. And so here we are. We have been gathering together in this Discovery Workshop series since February. This is all part of a 2-year whole system strategic planning process. The initiative is improving the circularity of compostables and compost. And we are here today featuring the different views and perspectives of folks who work on policy. So we have policymakers, policy influencers, and we've got a great series of questions to help talk about kind of what is happening from the policy perspective in this system. Before we begin, I want to just highlight our antitrust statement. And we have a whole network of different types of stakeholders in this space. The Future Search Initiative involves stakeholders from various industries. Some stakeholders may be considered competitors in the marketplace. The Future Search process shall not be used to obtain individual company advantage, nor used in pursuit of any anti-competitive objective. To do so may violate state and federal antitrust laws. By participating in this event and this process, you agree to abide by the restrictions set out in this statement. And so here we are all together, an incredible cross-section of this system, and it is really about highlighting how to improve collaboration and communication across the U.S. composting system and the U.S. compostables industry. And so we are all here together working on improving the circularity of compostables and compost. And this 2-year project is a whole system strategic planning and systems change effort focused on engaging pioneers from all parts of the system to come together to create a shared vision and a collective roadmap toward optimizing the circular economy of the U.S. composting industry. So this work centers, but is not limited to food contact compostables, and the strategic planning that we're doing is guided by the Future Search model. We have had an incredible array of leaders from across the system and across the country guiding this process. So our steering committee is an incredible cross-sector group, so very appreciative of all of the thinking and the time and the effort that has been made to guide this amazing project. We have had an incredible network of folks across the industry helping support us, both in their time and also resources. And so just wanted to give our deep appreciation for all the different organizations who have helped launch this project and support us as we go. So you hear us talking about circularity, and wanted to clarify that in this context, in this space, what we mean is for the U.S. composting system that the intentions of compostability are realized for compostable packaging and organic materials, and that the end products produced are able to be put back into meaningful use. So our wonderful steering committee, our first book of business was really looking at what are our intentions for this project. And so the broad cross-sector coalition that is working together in this project is really focused on designing an inclusive whole system circularity model for the health of the composting industry that maximizes environmental benefits. We want to improve collaboration and coordination, improve information flow, direct more food waste to commercial composting facilities, and create value and confidence for all stakeholders, and focus in on shifting stakeholder behavior to mitigate contamination. This project includes 3 different components, and so we are beginning with everybody. And so we're beginning with a long discovery process. And so we have 14 of these discovery workshops. We started in February, and we started kind of at the beginning. We started with the piles, and we're working backwards all the way to policy, which we'll be talking about today. In a couple of weeks, we will be getting together for a 3-day Future Search strategic planning event with a microcosm of the whole system. And after that event, we will be launching the activation of the strategic plan that is created and co-created by everybody participating.
And we are at our last discovery workshop today. So we started off with the idea of having 12 that grew to 14, and we are at our final one. We have a really good cross-representation of the system listed here, and this is the basis of the stakeholder groups that we are bringing into the conversation at the strategic planning event in just a couple of weeks. All of the data from this conversation today, as well as the first 13, have been will be collated and themed, and that data is going to be brought into the room for kind of a current state conversation on what's present to inform the future state planning. And that data is actually publicly available, open sourced information, and I will just share that link with you. We have it on a Google Drive. And yeah, if you missed any of the initial recordings, they're super insightful and full of a lot of wisdom. There's so many different experts from across the industry that have been elevated. Their perspectives have been elevated. The opportunities, the challenges have been outlined. Please check out past YouTube recordings at the link that is in the chat right now. And the next up is the event. So we are in like the final preparation, getting final head counts, getting all of our volunteers and logistics teams prepped to facilitate this in-person working session that goes over 3 days, where we are going to be collectively going through a change journey together that starts in the past, moves to the present, and builds to the future. And it's really generating a shared understanding around commonalities on what is the work that we're willing to do together. And like that sense of shared commonality informs the future state, which then informs the strategic plan and the basis of the different work streams. And so that will then, the end of the event is the beginning of the activation of the plan, which is really this cross-sector, cross-boundary effort around collaboration. And some of the big issues that have come up is super important. And if you look at some of the data, you'll see that there are themes across the board of what folks are saying are important. And we're really hoping to get granular in the room when we're together, when we think about future state planning. There are a couple registrations still trickling in. If there is some reason that you really, really want to get there and you have not been able to register or express interest, I'll put the interest form in the chat, but we are like really, really close to cutting it off. So just wanted to keep the door slightly open. Specifically around this policy conversation, since it's so important and it has such a systems impact. And so I'll shift us into introducing our panelists. So we have a large group today. Mallory Anderson, who is a policy specialist with Hennepin County from Minnesota. Cullen Lease, who is the organics lead with the Washington State Department of Ecology. Heather Trim, the executive director of Zero Waste Washington. Alex Truelove, legislation and advocacy manager at BPI. Senator Ben Allen, chair of Environmental Quality Committee with the state of California. Nick Lapis, director of advocacy for Californians Against Waste. And Brian Pontius, government relations specialist with Ingevity. So thank you all so much for being here. We will be going question by question. We're going to hear from each panelist in the order that I just shared on question 1, and then move to collectively to question 2, then to 3, then to 4. As you have questions, as Candy said, please put them in the chat for the people on the virtual side. And for those of you in the room, please write your thoughts down in real time. We will be reserving the last 30 minutes for a live Q&A. And when that happens, we will have you raise your hand and come to the front of the room where there's a mic stand to ask your questions. And then we'll kind of direct it to whichever panelist feels most compelled to answer first. So the first question here is, tell us about how your organization or agency interacts with the composting system and policy making. What role does it play in creating, supporting, or implementing policy that impacts composting systems and or the compostables industry? So we will start off with Mallory Anderson.
Yeah, hello everyone. So Hennepin County is the most populous county in Minnesota and the 33rd largest county by population in the country. Hennepin County serves just over 1.2 million residents, and we're home to several stadiums and event centers. In Minnesota, counties are responsible for the management of waste and are required to complete regular solid waste management plans. We engage with cities, private industry to meet ambitious recycling goals. In the metropolitan area around Minneapolis and St. Paul, we have a goal set by our legislature to reach 75% recycling by 2030. So despite expansive programs we run here at the county, the programs our cities run, we've seen stagnant recycling rates, and we continue to look to organics as a big opportunity for us to get closer to our recycling goal. As a county, we have authority to set ordinance. We are able to establish grants and distribute funding to help fund programs that we think will help us get to our recycling goal. And we also advocate for policy at the state level in collaboration with partners. So for starting first with county level policy, our focus has been on providing access to service to residents. And we also hold large food sector generators accountable to properly manage their food scraps. Hennepin County has Ordinance 13, which requires large food sector generators to sort their food scraps and either manage it through a food to animals program or compost it. The policy also requires cities of a certain size to ensure access to curbside organics collection. And that is for most residents, but not all residents. It does not include most multifamily properties, so anything with more than 4 or 5 homes in one structure. Those are not often included in those collection programs. And the county also receives revenues from a state solid waste management tax, which is levied on trash. The revenues we receive, we pass along to cities to help cover the costs of their recycling and organics collection programs. And we've adjusted the allocation formula of the pass-through of those funds to our cities to further incentivize organics programs in the county. And then at the state level, we led through a joint county board called the Partnership on Waste and Energy, an effort to pass extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products. This law includes all options from reuse, recycling, and composting. And from the very beginning, we're very focused on making sure that composting and compostable packaging was considered in the same light as recyclable packaging. We are not the only ones who have innovative programs in the state. Our partners in the Partnership on Waste and Energy, called the Recycling and Energy Board, which is a joint powers board between our metro county neighbor Ramsey County and its neighbor Washington County. They've invested in a slightly different model where they have durable food scraps collection commingled with their trash, and they've invested in robots and a sorting system to pull those bags out and have them brought to a compost site. So we have done a lot of work at the city, county, and state level to further work around making composting a part of our citizens and residents and people who come and enjoy spaces in our county, a part of their everyday life.
Great. Thank you, Mallory. Let's go over to Cullen.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cullen Newmoff, and I am the organics lead at the Department of Ecology. Mallory, we're always checking out what Hennepin County is doing, so thanks for being here. So as many of you may or may not know, in the state of Washington, we recently passed a suite of organic management laws over the last handful of years. And these laws aim at reducing organic material in our landfills by 75% by the year 2030. And so when we're thinking about, as an agency, what do we do that interacts with composting and compostables, certainly we lean, of course, into these laws. And these laws really first focus on maximizing food waste prevention. And then they do move into requirements around curbside organics collection for both residents and businesses. And finally, these laws, very specific to this conversation, also include compostable product labeling requirements. So at Ecology, we are tasked with understanding the nuances of law interpretation and implementation. And of course, as you all know, implementation includes working with the many stakeholders that are impacted by these new requirements in this recent legislation. And historically, Ecology has had more focus on composting systems, including supporting the permitting process and receiving annual reporting data from operating compost facilities. And this falls specific to this topic. We will and are required by law to update a rule that will address contamination thresholds at our composting facilities. And this contamination threshold will be specific to both incoming feedstock and outgoing finished product as well. And in recent years, we've gotten more involved in discussion around compostable products, specifically due to our labeling requirements. And this work has involved a lot of partnership with producers, offering technical assistance, and also just generally answering questions that come up because of the labeling requirements, and also to users of compostable products. So, what does it mean to make sure that they're getting into the right receptacle, or what does it mean that they need the right infrastructure to be managed appropriately? And finally, tomorrow, actually, we'll be wrapping up a one-year advisory committee that was a research-driven process to explore and recommend best practices for compostable product management in Washington State. This advisory committee was a multi-stakeholder process, and throughout the rest of the conversation today, I'll definitely be highlighting some of the things that we learned through that research-driven process. Thanks for inviting me.
Great, thank you, Cullen. Let's go over to Alex.
Heather first.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Trim, Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington. We are a statewide organization that primarily, we primarily work on trying to get laws passed at the state level, the city and county, a little bit the federal level. And as Cullen mentioned, we have a suite of bills that have turned into law that have passed since 2019 related to this topic. So starting with two bills in 2019, one led by Rep. Beth Dolio that got us going on food waste, and then another one led by Rep. Bill Ramos that was about compostable products. And then since then, bills led by Rep. Fitzgibbon, HB 1799, that established the goal, and among other things, a big system changing bill. And then that was in 2022 in HB 1033 that set in place the compostable products task force that Cullen just mentioned, led by Rep. Wallen. And then in 2024, a big second bill on organics led by Beth Dolio that mandates single family collection of organics material curbside for the urbanized parts of our state by January 1, 2030. And in general, we are trying to do what California did, and you'll be hearing more about that in a minute, with California 1383. And our approach overall is that all of these bills that we're working on in the state work together. So for example, we're working big time on the WRAP Act, which is an EPR bill that includes packaging. People have mentioned that. These are all pieces that all need to work together. No one bill is solving our problem. And then just to conclude, I feel like that one of the biggest bugaboos in this whole effort has been compostable products. And so I'm very hopeful about this whole process. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Heather. Let's go over to Alex in the room.
Okay, testing the mic, mostly just so folks digitally to make sure that they can you all hear me virtually as well as in the room? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Just
loud
wanna-
and clear. Sounded great.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I'm Alex. I'm with BPI. BPI is North America's leading organization for compostable products. We have over 600 members, and I suspect best known for our certification scheme, which includes tens of thousands of products that bear our BPI logo. But we support that certification work with policy. As an expert stakeholder, we have developed principles for policies like EPR with the U.S. Compost Council. We've used those principles to ensure that EPR bills in Colorado and California, thank you, Senator Allen, and Minnesota, thank you, Mallory, have supported compost to the extent that compostable products pay into those programs. We want to see that funding support the end of life of those products and make sure that there is representation from the industry. We've also done similar work on foodware ordinances, on product labeling, some of which Heather just mentioned. We've weighed in on microplastic regulation, compost infrastructure grants, and market development, really anything that touches our industry. Our ultimate vision is no organic waste, period. And so everything we do in the policy realm is to support that with that in mind.
Great,
I'll
thank
stop
you.
there.
Awesome. Senator Ben Allen, let's go to you next.
Hi there, everybody. It's so good to see so many friends and fellow travelers in this very important space. Look, I would just say that as an elected official, we're just constantly communicating with activists, like so many of you, policymakers, policy implementers, and I'm really thrilled to see all the work up in Washington being highlighted. Because I think in a funny way, we're in a bit of a friendly rivalry with each other to try to keep pushing the envelope on these issues. We've learned so much from Washington, from Oregon, from British Columbia, in fact, partners all around the country and in Canada as well, obviously. But states truly are the incubators of so many innovative ideas through our democracy, and we really are engaging in a very real dialogue with some of these other states, very much including, and if not highlighting, Washington State. So thank you to all the leaders from Washington who have helped to inform our process, and we've kind of challenged each other through all of this. I think so. I was the author of our big plastics EPR bill, SB 54, which was a multi-year process. That was very difficult, actually, but ultimately successful. And it involved a lot of different factors, I mean, including using a ballot measure to create leverage, the threat of a ballot measure to create leverage, to finally bring industry folks to the table. What's been interesting ever since the passage of SB 54, there's a lot of kind of interest now in just implementing EPR programs on all sorts of different sectors. And it's really not an easy thing to just dump a cookie cutter approach involving EPR onto a new type of product or a new market or industry. You really have to spend hours and hours and hours and days and weeks listening and really getting to the bottom of the details of the product, the distribution mechanisms, the markets, all of the unique challenges associated with a particular product. And composting, it's like the original EPR, I guess, as a concept. But it's one of those areas where where there's a lot of devils in the details. And I think really, and in fact, quite frankly, California's been a leader, but we've also run into some trouble with some of our with some of our policies on the implementation side. So it takes a willingness to really work and listen, a willingness to be flexible and make changes as facts come on the ground that call for those changes. Advocates getting involved, potentially impacted residents, department, agency representatives, industry, local government. It's all ultimately about really bringing people together and having open dialogue and trying to just continue to push people to to be flexible, but also keep their eyes on the prize when you're trying to get legislation done. So one of probably my most important class in law school was negotiations, and in the end of the day, what I really learned from that class was that different groups might come to a negotiation with 15 different priorities, but when it really comes down to it, your side really cares about points 3, 6, and 12, and the other side cares most about 5, 8, and 14. And even if they really don't like the other side's positions on the other items, they can live with them as long as they get what they care most about. And so, I would just say we care a lot about the U.S. composting system. We have SB 1383. We're looking to make changes and improve upon it. We really want to make sure that our decision making continues to be informed by the experts and the folks who are working in the space. So please, don't hesitate to engage with us, to reach out, to try to make sure your voices are heard as we're developing policy. Because I think as you're hearing, the things that we're doing in our state government and state governments like Washington really are leading the country and leading the national conversation. So please make sure that you're engaging us as you have opinions and feelings about legislation and policies that are coming out of our various jurisdictions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Senator Van Allen. Let's go over to Nick.
Hi, Nick Lapis with Californians Against Waste. I think it's almost a little funny I'm following Senator Allen and Heather.
Hi, Nick.
Californians Against Waste is an environmental organization based in Sacramento. We've been around since 1977. Very similar scope to what Heather does in Washington. So very similar organizations, and we work together all the time. What we do mostly is we propose policy, campaign for it, campaign for the passage of the policy, work on implementation, really focused on policy implementation and development. We kind of touch this issue of compostable plastics in a few different angles. One is we've been working a lot on plastics and packaging more broadly, including on Senator Allen's legislation, bills before that, for going back for decades on plastics. But we also do a lot of work around organics and composting, having sponsored, I think, most of the bills around California's organics laws, worked on the SB 1383, 1826, all of those laws. And then the third angle is the truth in environmental advertising. Our organization was the sponsor of the original, first in the country, I believe, Truth in Environmental Advertising law in 1990, which limited recyclability claims. And then we co-sponsored Senator Allen's update of that bill, major update a couple of years ago. And we've worked on the half dozen bills regulating degradability claims as well. And to Senator Allen's point, Heather and I love the rivalry. It's a very friendly rivalry. Or one of us has an idea and puts into a bill, and then the other copies it and then builds on it. And we've definitely seen that with the degradable labeling, and gotten some great ideas from Washington on that. I'll probably just leave it there.
Thanks, Nick. And then Brian, let's go to you in the room.
Perfect. Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Brian Pontius. I'm with Ingevity. We are headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina, where it is always beautiful and always warm. We have 3 business segments within our company. So the first is performance materials. So we actually manufacture activated carbon from sawdust, which goes into your automobile, which captures your vapor emissions from your gasoline tank. We have our performance chemicals division, which makes bio-based chemicals. Some of those are used in our ag chem products, which can actually help farmers use less applications of pesticides. And then we have our advanced polymer technologies business, which manufactures, I love all polymers, but my favorite polymer, polycaprolactone. And so polycaprolactone is a special polymer in the sense that it is certified industrial compostable by BPI, It's also certified to be home compostable and certified biodegradable in the soil, freshwater, and marine environments. And as far as what I do for our company, I'm on our government relations team, and my real sole focus is trying to push this industry forward and maintain, market access for our products. But beyond that, trying to make sure that this vision we all have for circular economy, for compostable products, is achieved, right? And so, from my end as a company, that means working with policymakers. It means working with composters. I'm really proud that our company, like many of the other companies that are manufacturing products, work really, really closely with composters to try to figure out, how can we make this work for you? How can we help you? How can we achieve this vision? And it also means working through associations. So, we're in BPI, we're in Ameripen, we're in a few other associations, and really trying to do our best to coalition build so that, when Alex is going in to advocate, he has to back up, he has some friends, and as an industry that we are united and we're pushing for the same message. I would just say very quickly, again, we're in Charleston, South Carolina. So, if you're ever curious about what we do or you want to learn more, just educate yourself, come on down to Charleston, take a visit to our headquarters, and we're happy to have you.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so I think this brings us to our second question, and we'll go back up to the top to Mallory.
And so our second question is, what does your organization believe are the greatest opportunities to improve the circularity of compostables or compost through policy making? What policies have you supported in the past? What policies do you hope to see in your jurisdiction, service area, or nationally? And so starting with Mallory.
Yeah, so again, from the county perspective, our focus has been, like I said, really on access and collection. In Minnesota, BPI and certified compostable products are accepted at compost sites, so we don't have that challenge to overcome. And so we've really focused on making this normal and a part of people's everyday lives. And we have, like I said, our county ordinance, which requires access to curbside organics collection for folks. And we are in the process of setting up to expand that, move the barrier down from, I think it's 10,000 cities with 10,000 residents or less, and move it down to 5,000 residents or less, that they don't have to do curbside. And instead we have a robust program. Like I said, one of our tools is funding. So we provide grant funding to cities to establish drop-off collection sites for folks who live in multifamily buildings, or in those smaller communities where curbside isn't as much of an option for them. And then when it comes to our food waste collection, expanding our inspection and enforcement of that. As we all know, policy really requires implementation and often enforcement. It requires people to understand what the policy means to them and to help them come into compliance with it. And just because you pass a policy doesn't inherently mean that that policy is going to be something that folks transition to doing. So that is a big part of the county story, at least, is making, and I think you'd see that at the state levels too, where if you don't have the institutional organization to implement policy, they often just sit on the books. And then at the state level, we're very much looking forward to the implementation of an amendment made to our plastic bag labeling law. That law banned the sale of biodegradable bags and required ASTM standards to be met for any bags that were labeled as compostable, which the Hennepin County runs a transfer station, and we have seen improperly labeled bags come through, and we're able to take action in partnership with the agency to get those bags fixed and out of the system. And then the Minnesota legislature also expanded that law to all food packaging. recently. So that is also going to be, that's in the process of being implemented now. And we really see that as an important part of helping create circularity for organics. It'll reduce confusion for folks and help people get things to the right bin. And if people don't have access to composting, it's going to end up in the trash anyway. We really want to see trash stop going to those compost sites. We're also looking forward to the implementation of the Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act, which is the title of our extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper law. And like I said, it was very much crafted out of the intent of having a holistic system here. We weren't just focused on kind of traditional, I'll call it recycling. This law was crafted with the intent of really allowing flexibility for producers to evolve and innovate. And as long as that packaging is reusable, recyclable, or compostable, we don't want to be in the way of letting producers figure out what's best for their products. We just want to be a part of making sure that there is a system to collect it and get it to where it needs to go and make sure those materials are managed appropriately. And I think a lot of us here in Minnesota strongly agree with there are places where compostable packaging just works and makes sense. And we didn't want the existing infrastructure and the kind of work we've already done to get compostable packaging used by small businesses and to replace otherwise things that would be otherwise trash. We want to kind of keep building on what we've already been successful in achieving. So although and let's see, we didn't want compostables to be outside of this system. We wanted to them, like kind of Alex said, we need compostables to be a part of these programs and to benefit from the producer fees that they are paying. So we expect that the Minnesota Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act will be helpful in helping expand composting infrastructure and collection throughout the state.
That's great. Yeah, access and is so important for any of these programs to work. And so really appreciate that. All right, Cullen.
Great, thanks so much. So one of the findings that was underscored in this in this advisory committee on compostable products was that compostable product lookalikes are one of the leading causes of contamination in Washington-based compost facilities. So we really are hopeful, and we see that as an opportunity that our new labeling requirement law will reduce contamination, particularly from these lookalikes in our compost facilities. For reference, this requirement started on producers January 1st of this year, and enforcement just began July of 2024. We have an observation portal where members, or I should say citizens of the state of Washington, can submit what they deem as, products that are not compliant with the labeling requirements. And just for reference today, since July, we've had 20 enforcement actions, or 20 reports, I should say, 12 of 20. So 60% have been related towards film bags, and all of them have been related to misleading labels, meaning a non-compostable bag was using a color that was only meant for compostable bags, or was using a term like biodegradable. So we think that's one opportunity. And the second opportunity is, when we consider organics management of the state of Washington, we recognize that there is a toolbox to best manage those organics. And we do consider that compostable products may be a really viable tool in this toolbox. And I'm going to speak a little bit more to this in our challenges section, that after our year-long advisory committee process, we still don't have the perfect set of data and or truly research that tells us where the optimal use case and the type of product to maximize food waste diversion. So again, recognizing it as a tool in the toolbox, but still trying to figure out what the optimal use of that tool is. So leaning now into the composting piece of the puzzle, where is the opportunity there? Well, certainly based on historical data, we know that as increased feedstock flows into organic management facilities, we also see contamination rates go up. And of course, oftentimes this does also translate into contamination at the finished product. But again, I'm going to lean into that labeling law. One of the opportunities is that we're hoping to see that contamination go down. And secondly, the organics management laws passed here were really mindful of the supply and demand relationship between sending increased flow or increased volume of product through organic management facilities and also needing that demand pull. And so there were different types of that law that were trying to address both the supply and the demand side of that. And again, that's a huge opportunity right there. We could see this compost industry grow because of these organic management laws and diverting any of the organics from the landfill. These are very new here in the state of Washington, so I don't have any results to report to here today. But again, we see that as an opportunity. And finally, as for new policies that we'd like to see enacted, we are very much in the do portion of the Plan, Do, Check, Act framework. So we're really trying to wrap our collective hands around existing legislation that has recently been passed and understanding those impacts, and then using the information from that to kind of quote unquote, as we might think about, check and further inform action. So again, here in Washington, we're really in the do portion of organics management's processes. I'll end there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that. Now let's go to Heather.
Great. So I will reflect the Love Fest. Love our colleagues in California, Senator Allen and Nick. We love to compete, collaborate, and build upon them. And in fact, I am down in LA right now and enjoyed that 5.1 earthquake at 7:28 this morning. So I'm right in Senator Allen's stomping grounds. And we are also really blessed. As you can see, we have Cullen and other staff at Ecology who are really smart and on top of it. And it's just been really great to see them sort of take off with these laws. We have a very strong leadership in our Washington State Legislature that are really great on climate change. And that has been the framing for these bills and the fact that we have momentum building behind them and going behind them. And furthermore, this issue is extremely popular with the public. So there's a whole lot of positive push for this. We are right now working on our organics bill for January of 2025 that will be led by Rep. Beth Dolio. And just to give you an idea of the topics we are doing in that new bill, the topics that are being looked at are residual pesticides as feedstock for compost facilities, carbon sequestration project initiatives, operator training. In other words, we need better operator training requirements for compost facilities, food waste tracking and flow mapping, school food waste projects, a C&D construction and demolition waste study, and looking at offal. If you don't know what offal is, ask that in the Q&A. Load rejection. We have a problem that the facilities do not equally reject the loads when they're coming in. They're afraid of losing customers if they reject loads that have a lot of contamination in them. Consistent bin colors. A better education program that's focused on participation and keeping the material clean, permitting, air quality and siting of facilities, multifamily source separation, enforcement, food date labeling. We are thrilled that California has a bill headed to the governor on that, and we actually are teeing up the same here. And yes, compostable products. So I will leave it at that. Oh, other than to say, we are at the point where we need to consider bans of specific products. And I'll stop there.
That is a very healthy list for this next coming year. All right, so let's shift into the summit room and hear from Alex.
Great. Well, I feel spoiled by a lot of the leaders on this call. So what I will say, I think maybe less applicable in some of these geographies, but in an effort to not be redundant, maybe take the opportunity to zoom out and look at opportunities at the national level, where I think we all agree we have a long way to go to build the infrastructure that we need. Depending on how you crunch the numbers, 8 to 10% of U.S. residents have access to compost systems. And yet the story is so compelling. Turning gigatons of methane from our landfill organic waste into this magical soil amendment that provides nutrients and increases soil organic matter and resists drought and erosion. It's almost too good to be true. Why aren't we there? Obviously, perhaps biased, but think that combustible products are really important in certain applications to maximize those results. So I think that's to me kind of the obvious greatest opportunity. Without those systems in place, it's really, I think hard to really make the rest of it worth it, if you will. To Mallory's point about implementation, I do think how we get there really matters. I think we've seen in certain places mandates to collect organic waste without proper support, leading to composters that are caught between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to turn through tons of material in a short period of time, maybe not able to produce a finished product that's stable and mature, unable to be flexible with the feedstock that they accept, unable to think about thoughtfully how to integrate compostable products. So I think that needs to be, part of our collective plan moving forward. The good news is I think there's an increasing and diversified place where we can find support. I think EPR programs are a great example of producers quite literally putting their money where their mouth is, but state dollars, federal grants, dare I say, higher landfill tipping fees. So I think there are a lot of ways to get there. But yeah, that's I think the greatest opportunity in my book.
That's great. And thank you, Alex, for touching on kind of the movement toward kind of universal and national policies. That's great. Senator Allen.
Yeah, I would say, well, let's talk about a few things. Uniform standards and labeling, first of all. They've been, really key issues when it comes to getting compost right. I mean, AB 1201, which is the Ting bill that was alluded to by Nick. That was a companion bill to my SB 343, which was the Chasing Arrows bill, to basically make it clear that only truly compostable material could be labeled as such. Because I think, as all of us know, there was a lot of goofiness on the part of industry that makes claims about compostability or recyclability that are not, they're really not grounded in the actual workable reality on the ground. I think the problem, one of the problems we have is we don't really have truly workable standards for what can be accepted at a composting facility. They want to limit collection to green waste and food scraps and not accept any type of packaging to ensure that the compost product that they're selling can be marked as organic. This, of course, makes it difficult for innovative companies to invest in non-plastic compostable alternatives. So that's one of the many kind of challenges out there. I've run a couple of bills in this space. The first one, SB 1232, back in 2022, which sought to establish biodegradable standards. It turned out to be very difficult, given all the different factors that impact how a material breaks down: environment, time frame, amount of heat, other stimulants that need to be applied. I mean, all these things, the folks on this call know about. We then introduced SB 665 in 2023, which would have set up a working group of experts across various agencies with jurisdiction relating to biodegradability. Because we said, okay, obviously, the legislature is maybe not the best place to figure this out. Let's get a group together. Well, the bill was vetoed. So now various international efforts have come underway to suggest uniform standards. One of those efforts is being led by Ocean Plastic Leadership Network, which is proposing standards for the plastics treaty that are currently being developed. So once we actually have some decent standards that are adopted, this will help California's efforts to implement SB 54, our plastics bill, which requires all packaging and foodware to be recyclable or compostable. We know that foodware is particularly difficult to recycle, and developing compostable alternatives that can be collected, especially curbside, would reduce the amount of plastic waste that we're generating. So this is what we're grappling with right now. I mean, I'm going to try to make another run, but we really are we're watching what's happening elsewhere. I think we have to re-engage with our governor. I think one of the challenges is money so tight right now in our state budget that that it's really reduced the ambition. But that doesn't mean, really some modest investments in this space could make a huge difference in creating a more coherent system that will actually be functional. And that's what I'm ultimately looking for.
No, that's great. Nick, let's hear from you.
Thanks. I think we have a lot of work to do. And we have to find a way to make compostables work for composters. And because ultimately, if it doesn't get composted, it's not compostable. That's kind of been our ethos in the legislature in the last few years has been, if it doesn't get recycled, it's not recyclable. If it doesn't get composted, it's not compostable. And in many ways, we have our work cut out for us, right? Like we spent a lot of time this week at the conference, at the BPI conference, talking about the barriers and how to overcome them. I was on a panel on Monday, and both my panel and the one before that was really highlighting challenges that folks have with compostable products. And we need to work together to overcome those. I mean, some like the NOP issue are a really big barrier. It'll never be reasonable to ask composters to take an ingredient that makes their product unsellable. I think we can all agree that any manufacturer would never agree to that. And the NOP is a major barrier. And I know there's some frustration of like, why hasn't this been solved earlier? Or is it too little, too late? Why hasn't everybody been pushing in the same direction here? But for better or worse, I think the issue has been forced and we need to all work on it. And while the session on Monday really talked a lot about the barriers, I think something else came out of that as well, which is that there are folks on all sides of these issues that want to work in good faith to finding solutions, right? I don't think there was a single critic on the panel on Monday on either of the challenges panels that didn't say like, yeah, if we could overcome these challenges, we would be there with you. We do think that compostable bags could have an important role in collecting organics for food scrap composting. We do think that potentially compostable food serviceware could be part of a solution for something like SB 54. And it's a question of working together. I think there's a lot of overlap in where we all agree, even though we spend a lot of time talking about the things we don't agree on. And I'll focus on California specifically, but as Senator Allen mentioned, we passed AB 1201, which was the latest. It was the 6th or 7th in a row bill on compostable labeling, basically limiting degradability claims and not allowing any claims at all about degradability other than compostable or home compostable if you meet the standards and if you meet all the other requirements in the bill. Some of those requirements were written to be voluntary. For example, the state agency in charge of implementing this is CalRecycle, and they are allowed to adopt guidelines for what lookalike products are not allowed. They're allowed to adopt guidelines for what labeling requirements should be on compostable products to make sure that they're obvious for consumers and for compost facility operators. But it was written as a may for fiscal reasons, and that process hasn't even begun. I'm actually not necessarily critical of CalRecycle on this because they have a lot on their plate. We've given them a lot of bills, a lot of regulatory processes, but we're all on the same page for wanting to see that, because as long as we have random other products out there that look indistinguishable from compostables, it doesn't matter what all the good actors do. We're going to have a bunch of crap coming into composting facilities, right? Mm-hmm. Similarly, third-party certification. The way the bill was written is that third-party certification is required 1 year after CalRecycle chooses certifiers. And they have not done that. Again, not criticizing them, but I think we're all in agreement that we need to work together to push them a little bit to actually implement the law. And it was written as a may, so they're not breaking the law, but it's such a good opportunity where I think the environmental community, the product manufacturers, and the composters are all completely on the same page. And in the context of SB 54, I think there are inherent tensions, but at the same time, there are a lot of areas of overlap and a lot of areas where we can work together. The way SB 54 is written, we like to usually use the shorthand of all packaging must be reusable, recyclable, or compostable, right? But it doesn't really say that. It says reusable, recyclable, or eligible to be labeled compostable pursuant to the code section created in 1201. And the requirements in 1201 are very, very strict and onerous, and some of them might end up being impossible, like the NOP requirement. But that was sort of the way that bill was written. CalRecycle has sort of gone beyond that a little bit, and they have requirements beyond the 1201 requirements that they are proposing to require that 50 and then 75% of composting facilities accept the materials, which we like in theory. That makes sense in theory, but this industry is maybe not quite mature enough for that requirement. And then there's also a requirement that 100% of the material that goes to composting facilities be transformed into compost, which is not feasible for anything. A banana peel would not meet that requirement. And so, and I think there's, again, agreement. I think there's a lot of good people on both or all sides of this issue that want to work to address the challenges.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nick. And we're going to close this question with Brian.
Yeah.
Nick, did
well,
you mean to say there was a lot of good people on both sides? Was that you channeling someone? All right.
Hopefully an
That's
updated version of that sentiment. Yes.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I won't even talk about eating pets.
Right. Those are really compostable.
All right. Let's hear from Brian.
Well, first, just, as the producer on the panel, I want to make it very clear that we do not want bad actors. I think why you see so many producers at the BPI Summit is we want products to be certified. We don't want lookalikes. From a business point of view, they take our business. From a personal point of view, it's bad for the world. It's bad for the environment. And we don't want them. And, I think what we've seen is that, we look at the BPI certification, for example, it works. We've seen recent studies talk about compostable products do break down. It was the largest study of composters across the country. The products do break down. Another misconception we often hear is that, well, if you take compostable products, you bring in so much additional contamination. But then Closed Loop did a study on that. That's not true. And so, the certification scheme works. And I think that's where our attention needs to be. And I think to Nick's point, CalRecycle does have some ability to, push things a bit further with the labeling. And, if we can do that in a cooperative way, we'd be very supportive of that. We want products that have clear labeling, that are apparent to composters. And, that's what's gonna move our industry forward. And, I'll add, at the cost of, losing members over the year, BPI has really led on tightening their scheme. They were first on PFAS. Recently they tightened the scheme so that it requires on-product labeling. So if you want to have your product certified, you need on-product labeling. And, that ticked a lot of people off. But, the reason they've done it is it's what's best for the industry. And I think there's a lot of producers and a lot of folks that are in this association that want to see us move forward. And we're going to get there. It takes time. And I just want to say that we're making progress and we're going to get there. Very quickly, because I think it's been touched on, greatest opportunity was the original question. And I think by far that's EPR, right? And we look at SB 54, for the most part, the law could not have been written better for us. There's eco-modulation incentives, there's funding for composters, there's a seat on the advisory board for a compostable manufacturer and a composter. There's a high bar for recyclable, so that basically if your product can't be recyclable or reusable, it makes it more likely that they're going to use a compostable alternative. And so it was written very well for us. I think where we're struggling right now is the regulations we can talk about in a moment. But as far as opportunities, EPR by far, one of the best opportunities. And we're seeing that across the country, right? Minnesota is a great example. Another recent example where compostable products are seen, they're accepted, and they're fit into the program very well. Another opportunity I just want to very, very quickly touch on is BPI's petition, right? So oftentimes we hear about this organic issue and it's a problem, we need to fix it. And, BPI is trying to do that. They submitted a petition. They are going through the petition process. I'm almost done. And And you know, I would say for companies, if you want your products, you know, to be accepted by more composters, you know, get behind this petition and help us get it through, right? I mean, we need your help. And you know, finally, I would just say we're gonna hear challenges in a moment. There are so many more opportunities than challenges, you know, for our industry. You know, that's to Nick's point. The first day of the conference was talking about challenges, and that's important. But if you look at where our industry is now today compared to 10 years ago and where we're standing compared to a lot of other folks in the packaging industry, we're sitting pretty good. I mean, you look at SB54, you look at Minnesota's EPR program, you know, we are gonna get through these hurdles, and we are gonna be accepted, and we are gonna be collected and processed, and it's gonna take some more work, but we're sitting in a good place. And I'm excited to see what's next. Thank you.
That's right.
Unless we're not holding Brian captive and giving him a script.
All right, so we're going to shift to the third question, and we're going to actually put a timer on each of you, about 2.5 minutes, so we can have enough time for the Q&A at the end. So if we politely interrupt you, please don't be offended. I just want to make sure that we have time for a robust conversation on Q&A. So the third question is, what have been some of the greatest challenges your organization has observed or experienced in trying to create or implement policies that improve the circularity of compostables and or compost? We will start with Mallory.
Yeah, hi everyone again. So the greatest challenge I see is just the basic challenge of something new and different. Change is difficult. We all know that. It requires strong leadership, a lot of energy and resources, and a big acceptance of failure sometimes. There'll be misses, there'll be challenges, and there'll be kind of misalignment of priorities among the huge number of folks that have to come together to make change happen. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face in kind of overcoming some of the challenges we've had around implementing and helping our partners expand and implement their programs. And then we've also just seen, you know, people are very cost sensitive, and it's really difficult to structure these programs in a way that is free or low cost at times. And so if there's too high of a cost for folks, it can create a barrier to entry. And that's not what we want to have for these programs. We want them to be accessible for everyone. And although, you know, kind of hearing from others, like there's huge climate benefits, there's so many reasons this makes sense. But from the county perspective, we're competing for our commissioners' attention. We're competing with public services like housing, county roads, transit, public health, and we have to be a part of a suite of services that our organization provides. It is not, waste management is not our county's sole focus. We have many other services we provide. So to summarize, the greatest challenge I see is just the basic challenge of something new and different, and trying to get folks to work together and to be kind of reduce that risk aversion and experiment and be okay with things not working out perfectly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mallory. Let's go over to Cullen.
Super great. So many of the challenges I'm going to mention are specific to kind of our year-long advisory committee process. So certainly, I've talked a lot about our new labeling law requirements, but we also recognize from a national lens, this patchwork of varying label requirements is certainly a cause for confusion for both consumers and producers alike. You know, and I think, again, these are such new laws, we don't necessarily have a measure of effectiveness either. So I think that's another key. Is this going to be the silver bullet to the issues that we're experiencing? I'm not sure yet. we've paid heed to this too, but I would be remiss not to mention the kind of lack of infrastructure to properly care for end of life for the way these products have been designed. So, I think Alex threw out the percentage of 8 to 10% of Americans have access to composting infrastructure. And we face the same thing here in the state of Washington, that even if I'm a consumer and a user of a product and I put it in the right bin, which in itself is a challenge, is it going to actually get managed in the way it was designed to do at its end of life? And again, I paid heed to this before, but we recognize that there's a suite of tools to manage organics, and compostable products can be one of those tools, but I think we're lacking clarity and the specific use case and the type of compostable product that would maximize the diversion of food and organics from the landfill. So, an example of here is, are we going to invest and spend energy in a compostable cocktail stir, or are we going to invest and spend energy in like a retail setting with a compostable strawberry clamshell? So really kind of getting more strategic about the use of compostables. Again, needing more data to be able to do that is a challenge. Something that's been brought out is this consistent way to track and analyze compostables in the waste stream. So oftentimes this is done through a waste characterization study. The base measurement of that is weight. Weight is hard to capture the true essence of compostable products because they are very light in weight. So that is another aspect of this. And finally, again, we've heard before that it's not a perfect match between all facilities and their requirements for processing times and all compostable products. So just the tension between what facilities need and what compostables require. Again, we've heard this from other panelists as well. I think that was my time.
Perfect. Thank you. Heather.
So just a moment ago, at 4 minutes after the hour, wherever you are, the Washington Post sent out a climate alert, and the title of the alert is "Nearly every state ban on food waste appears to be failing except one," a new study shows. So I hate to tell you all, California, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont are the ones that are failing, and Massachusetts is the one that they show is actually succeeding. And in the article, the quote is, the laws had no discernible effect. So on reducing food waste to the landfill. So, and they didn't include the states that have the newer laws. This is a problem. And this is what I was going to list already as our number one challenge. Our number one challenge in terms of what the opponents are saying and why they're fighting what we're trying to do is that we don't have data that shows that how we can reduce food waste. And this sort of alludes a little bit to what Cullen just said now. So I would love it if someone else in the audience or one of the other presenters could come up with the analogy. We need an analogy to use for this. And because it's like, we need data to show that this can help reduce food waste. That to me is absolutely crazy that we have to do that, but that is the argument. You don't have the data. And so there are other things in our lives where you don't need to have the data to show something that's pretty obvious. So I'll leave it at that. And if someone else can come up with a great analogy, I'd be really happy.
Thanks, Heather. So keep that thought in your mind, and let's move to Alex in the room.
In an effort to give maybe a slightly different answer, I think we broadly have faced a lot of challenges around short-sightedness of policy design. So, for example, we've witnessed a tendency in some places to reduce products to their basic material. You're either plastic, your paper, your glass, and I think you lose a lot of context in that process. In particular, we've seen that kind of thinking lead to policies in certain geographies that have banned food-associated certified compostable plastic products just because they're plastic. And then those products have been replaced by non-certified paper or fiber products that are full of PFAS and non-biodegradable additives. Similarly, at our conference that Nick mentioned and attended and spoke at, thank you, Nick, a couple of days ago, a number of Bay Area leaders were lamenting that if compostable products are effectively banned in California due to some of the threats that Senator Allen and Brian mentioned, there may be literally no option, for example, for hot beverage cups. Lined paper coffee cups aren't recyclable in the Bay Area, and so if the future, if you forget your reusable mug, you may be out of options. You hold out your hand. I think more likely, it's those kinds of short-sighted decisions that might actually lead to a return of conventional single-use plastics. And there's an example of this in California, not to pick on California, but we're seeing a similar thing happen with food scrap collection, where language that limits the use of compostable bags for food scrap collection is leading to conventional polyethylene bags being used instead. Those bags are being sent to compost facilities where they're often being shredded by depackagers and introducing microplastics to finished compost. And that's obviously frustrating for an organization like PPI because the perfect product in my mind already exists and it's used all across the world. Compostable food scrap collection bags, and they increase participation and replace film, which is conventional film, which is any composter will say is probably their number one contaminant. I think some of that short-sightedness is driven by misunderstanding. Brian already talked about, I think, some of the perceptions versus realities about product breakdown and the corpus of data showing, health and toxicological studies and all that sort of stuff. So, I think that's a place that I would start to try to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Let's go over to Senator Ben.
Yeah, I think in terms of challenges, one of our big obstacles has been distrust. Some activists who want to reduce plastic waste fear that alternatives will be no better than the fossil fuel-based materials that are now polluting our environment and our bodies with microplastics. One of the challenges we had with SB 54 was folks that were, initially opposed to our efforts, not trusting that the standards established would be strong enough to guard against manufacturers finding a loophole to create more plastic and lead to greenwashing their products with compostability claims. I think you're hearing from our fellow panelists about some of the challenges we've been running into in California with our SB 1383 implementation. I mean, this is hard work, and you're just talking about mass social psychology and implementation and logistics and advertising and changing culture. Just still getting my mom to get her head around putting the organics in something separate than the trash. Just people are just so stuck in their ways. Another thing, on the plastic side, and I know this exists on composting too, and they're all interrelated, just all the competing jurisdictions of who handles. So just to give you an example of California, right? We've got the Water Board that works on limiting microplastics in drinking water. We've got the Ocean Protection Council that works on microplastics in our oceans. We've got the Department of Toxic Substance Control that has jurisdiction over microplastic toxins in consumer products. We've got CalRecycle, which oversees plastic recycling and compost regulations. And then you've got this smorgasbord of local implementation in individual cities and with all the different companies that do the waste hauling work. So it's just this madhouse of different players that all have different focus, different jurisdiction, different set of mandates and different priorities, quite frankly. And there's not necessarily a kind of a strong enough cohering principle that enforces conformity between between the various folks that are carrying out the work. So that's another challenge. The other thing, even just the lack of a shared vernacular. We don't have a shared meaning of what the word biodegradable means, or even compostable, right? Now actually, in a weird way, in California, I don't think anything can be labeled as biodegradable technically because we don't have a standard for it. We all know about the challenges about about compostability. So anyway, there's a lot of challenges and they've all been well discussed, but those are just a few more.
Thank you. Nick, let's go to you.
Thanks. We've spent a lot of time talking about the challenges for composters. So I'm going to actually skip that because I think everyone at this point kind of knows that side of things. I want to highlight, and this was actually sparked by an earlier comment about the challenges we have to making sure we have composting infrastructure. And ultimately, again, if we don't have composting infrastructure, then compostables are not compostable. And we have a lot of work to do to make sure that in California at least, that SB 1383 is successful. I hadn't seen that headline that Heather said came in from the Washington Post. But I don't think it's a fair statement to say that California's law isn't working. we started with a 2014 baseline, which completely coincidentally ended up being a low point for waste generation in California. We historically have had around 40 million tons landfilled. In 2014, we were down to 30 million, and we use that as our baseline. We're now back up to 40 as a state, which is bad, but organics disposal has not gone up and has actually gone down a little bit since that baseline. So instead of going up by a third, like everything else, it went down a little bit. And also, we're in the early days of implementing the program. But I do think that we need to start thinking about a very data-focused strategy for looking at interventions to see what works, what doesn't. I think we rely too much as an industry. I think we rely too much on feelings, on how much, what we've done in the past to promote recycling, what we've done in the past to roll out some of these programs. And we don't look to see like, hey, what actual interventions increase participation? And I think bin liners are a perfect example of that. I would bet that any study that would be done that would show that you give people bin liners, they're a lot more likely to compostable bin liners. They're a lot more likely to put their food scraps in the bin because people are grossed out about putting food in an unlined bin. Like, it seems obvious, but let's see what effect that has. But it's not just about compostable products. It's about education. It's about outreach. I think back to some of the early implementation in the Bay Area of the composting programs and hearing those folks at conferences talk about what worked and what didn't work. And a lot of it is stuff that in retrospect is obvious, but we don't need to relearn over and over. For example, I remember Jack Macy from San Francisco talking about the huge increase that they saw in collection once they put organics Slim Jim containers next to the prep stations at restaurants. Like, seems obvious, right? Or how they found that removing words from signage increased participation. And so we have all these things that we've learned or can learn. And my worry is that we're going to try to reinvent the wheel 500 times at 500 different jurisdictions, as opposed to really using an evidence-based approach and strategically finding interventions that work and replicating them. I would just hate for us to lose 20 years while we go through, generations of kids that slowly grow up in a system where they learn about composting at school and then eventually bring it home. It would just be really unfortunate if we had to wait 20 years to see composting reach the levels of recycling and then, surpass that. I had some other thoughts, but I'll leave it there just for time's sake.
Thanks, Nick. Let's finish this question with Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I think the elephant in the room, right, is California and the SB 54 regulations. As an industry, we spent quite a bit of time there the past year or more trying to work through them. And, where CalRecycle has landed so far is a dangerous place to be for industry, right? In the current proposed regulations, there's unworkable acceptance rates. There's some additional points that Nick mentioned as well. I just want to lay down for folks what that means, right? And so the way the law was written, as Senator Arnold would know because he wrote it, was to provide 3 compliance pathways, right? Recyclable, and I mean truly recyclable, which is really, really important, right? So making sure that if products are recyclable, they are meeting these high thresholds in California. So the product is truly being accepted, it's truly being processed. And it's not a company just putting the chasing arrows on their packaging to make themselves feel good. That was one option, right? Reusable, a second option, or the third was compostable. And for a lot of the contaminated food contact packaging, recyclers don't want it. They don't want it. You might be able to find one MRF in Indiana that does a pilot that says they can do one thing, but overall, right? I mean, it's pretty consistent. They don't want your dirty food waste contaminated materials. And that's why compostable products were supposed to fill a really important gap. And if you take that compliance pathway off the table for brands and for companies, you're going to be in a very dangerous place. Because what does that look like? I mean, that gives you 2 options, right? The first option is you're going to have companies who are going to resin dump into reusable products that aren't really reusable. Or B, you're going to have this exemption process, which is going to be abused by a lot of the companies saying, sorry, there's no compliance pathway for us. We need an exemption. And, you know, and I guess maybe the third option is you just don't have packaging. And that's a problem. I mean, you need packaging to protect your food, to prevent food waste. You know, we talk a lot about composting being a solution to, you know, the climate crisis, which it is, right? The first step is prevent food waste in the first place. And that's where packaging, you know, is really, really important, that you need packaging that works, that's innovative, and that brands have access to. And so I think it's just really important that we just remember the importance of compostable products and the fact that they are a viable and important compliance pathway for 54. And, you know, I'm really hopeful that this next round of regulations, CalRecycle is going to reconsider some of those provisions, and we'll be in a better place to be that third viable option for brands.
That's great. One of the things that I put into the chat, Nick had mentioned, wouldn't it be great if we could study more efforts that are out there? And the city of Seattle for a number of years now has required its haulers to line the bins that collect from residences and businesses. And so it'd be a great place to start for research and seeing if that's making a difference in terms of more food going into the bin. And so we have our fourth question next. I'm going to put that into the chat and read that out for you. So this is your opportunity for each of you to talk to the other stakeholders in the system. So what should other stakeholders in the composting system, supply chain, solid waste management system take into consideration when developing policies to address any of the issues that you've raised today? From your perspective and where you sit, what do you think would be the most helpful? And so we're going to hear from Mallory first.
I think first of all, I do strongly feel that we are agreeing that this is a shared issue that we all feel is a priority and need to take action on. But I think that would be the most important thing, is to get to be a part of the conversation and really start problem solving. The other, I think, particularly going through a packaging and paper extended producer responsibility process to develop that law and to get it passed is, and as we implement, is we really need to maybe quickly start to understand and implement best practices, learn them from each other, and then start standardizing. I definitely resonated with Senator Allen's comments about a vernacular around composting. You know, we have food scrap collection in one community, organics in another community. And I think we really all need to come together to standardize the way we talk about it, what these products look like, and make sure that from Minneapolis, from coast to coast, that, you know, it's a somewhat more similar system. I would say a lot of times the rhetoric is that's not how it is for recycling, but if you compare the composting, particularly for compostable packaging and food scraps collection and system across the country, I think it's very varied and different, and there isn't the same level of consistency that you might see for more traditional recycling. So I think really coming together, agreeing on our best practices, standardizing as best we can is probably, for me, the one place I feel we're going to start really moving forward. And I think you've heard some themes. You know, we're all concerned about labeling, confusion around making sure that things are going to the right place, and then solving problems for composters to make sure that compostable packaging isn't prohibiting them from having sellable product. So I think really just creating that consistency around the shared vision is my biggest topic I'd like everyone to keep working toward.
Yeah, that's great. And you had mentioned last time about the importance of accepting failure in the process, but also sharing lessons learned and coming together around that. Colin, let's hear from you.
Great. Yeah, I think if I'm thinking about things we've learned and communicating to all the stakeholders here today, like as many have mentioned, like course first really leaning into maximizing prevention techniques and minimizing unnecessary use of single-use items. Um, Secondly, as I've said so many times before, I think we recognize the need for a national labeling law that would be supportive for producers and consumers alike. Um, this constant tension that all of us have mentioned between kind of compostable product and the facilities, composting facilities. For example, here in Washington, we're a local control state regarding solid waste. So it's difficult for us to require the acceptance of, particularly for our private facility, of course, for the acceptance of food waste or compostable products. And I don't think any of us here want to create another system of single-use products that just end up in the landfill. So there's this piece of the puzzle about investing in composting infrastructure, but then also ensuring that composting infrastructure, is willing to accept products and that the processing operations can also process compostable products appropriately as to how they are designed. And that said, I think it's worth totally noting that there are mechanisms by which incentives can be used to encourage the acceptance of these, but I think we have to really be thoughtful about how we craft those incentives. And finally, truly, we are really pleased to have some very powerful laws reducing organics in our landfills. And I think as a state, we're really just collectively at the beginning phase of recognizing that these laws are going to truly dramatically evolve the way we manage and think about solid waste in our state. And I think as people sitting in our positions and policymakers, it's really important, I think, to get ahead of who will be bearing the burden of the change along the way, and essentially make sure whoever is bearing that burden has a support mechanism to get to the next step of evolution. So if we are thinking facilities need to be accepting or we need more facilities accepting compostable products, how are we going to support them, and how are we going to ensure that they have marketable products? So again, we are instituting and change and how we're thinking about solid waste, and how do we ensure that those who are pushing that change forward are not bearing all of the burden of that change.
Thank you, Colin. Let's go to Heather.
I'll be brief. Bottom line is time is now. We are there. Climate is not waiting. The food has got to get out of the landfill. We've got to deal with this issue because we do have composters who will not take materials, and we have materials that are not compostable, and we have confusion on the part of the consumers. So we would like a statewide standard, and we're not getting that yet, and we got to get there. Laws are going to be passed in the next few years, and so I'm very hopeful that this process in Denver in September will really help advance this conversation, because time's up from my perspective.
That's great. Thank you, Heather. All right, let's hear from Alex.
Great. I think I'd like to take this moment to expand a little bit on what Senator Allen and Brian have both mentioned about the organic ag requirements. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are aware, but right now our industry is threatened by a requirement in California that would require, or that does require, or will in the future, compostable products to be an allowable input for organic agriculture. What that means is attempting to reconcile 30-year-old agricultural rules with modern products that didn't exist back in the day when those rules were written. Unfortunately, at this point, I think we're finding that discussions aren't always being grounded in science, and to Nick's point, sometimes being driven by feelings. Not to invalidate feelings, but I think we need an evidence-based approach. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that BPI has petitioned the USDA to update their rules. Like the threats that Brian mentioned around SB 54, the lack of these organic ag requirements reconciling means a similar threat, where we risk losing a compliance pathway. We risk losing compostable products from the market. So produce stickers, food scrap collection bags, coffee and tea products, raw meat packaging, the wrapping around your stick of butter, condiment packets. Like, there's a long list, surprisingly long list of food and organic associated products that aren't feasibly reusable or recyclable. Plastic and paper and fiber is all at risk, to be clear. And not just for our industry, but I think this is something we want to resolve for composters as well, so they can accept certified compostable products and sell their compost for top dollar, maximize participation, replace non-compostable contaminants with compostables, reduce contamination that way, have their cake and eat it too. So to everyone outside California, please don't even think about instituting similar rules, and everyone working in California, please consider teaming up with our effort. One more short thing I'll mention too is I think long-term a successful system also means figuring out a way to standardize facility operation in some way. Right now, BPI, all of our members, we're trying to hit moving targets, and there's so many awesome composters. Many at our summit are making beautiful compost, but it's, I think, really hard to build systems if we don't know, what target we're chasing. And so I'd submit that as an additional idea. That's it.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. All right, shifting over to Senator Allen.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate all the comments about the challenges in California, and I share some of the frustrations. I think Nick knows we've had we've tried to push Cal Recycle and to be more responsive to some of these issues, and have run into some challenges. Of course, we get back to the kind of core problem that the compostable material that a lot of folks have right now is just not actually compostable in a single California compost facility, and there's no reasonable on-ramp that's been developed. So that's that's the challenge. I know my chief of staff's actually on a recycling and composting trip in Maine right now, and the group that she's on a tour with is leading a group of experts to establish criteria that that we could potentially adopt later. So it kind of gets back to this whole point that we really do need agreeable criteria that is actually grounded in reality. And I'm again very committed and very interested in working with the folks who've been speaking to see what we can come up with. And then of course we're gonna have to work on our friends in the administration. In the end of the day, this is all about just the importance of establishing a framework and standards in order to increase efficiencies in our operations in a way that's actually grounded in reality. And this ensures that the cart doesn't go before the horse. So kind of writ large, I think that we have to recognize, if you're, just to kind of answer the question about problem solving, we can't solve these problems overnight. Everybody wants to hit the home run on these important issues, but sometimes getting on base is equally important. It's really important to involve the producers, the manufacturers, and the composting facilities. They may, push back and drag their feet, and in fact, they will. But, not only are they the experts in their field who can offer a lot of important guidance, they're the ones who will ultimately, they're the ones that are ultimately going to determine whether these items get composted or not. On the production side, they're the ones who have the most control over their product going out. Just like they're a critical part of the conversation, and we ignore them at our peril.
That's great. All right, let's shift over to Nick.
Yeah, just to add on to other folks have said amazing things. So just to not be repetitive, the question is, what should other stakeholders take into account? And there are two categories that I want to flag. One is, I think there's a tendency for folks to assume that somebody else will look out for their interest. And there's this tendency of like, well, I'm sure the regs will be fine because they can't ban all XYZ, right? And they're just like, well, reasonable minds will prevail, or somebody in OP will figure it out. And I don't think anybody should take for granted that somebody else is going to be carrying your water. Because they might not be thinking about all your product lines that might have unique challenges. Like every once in a while, we bring up produce stickers. I don't think there's a single composter in the world that doesn't want produce stickers to be compostable, right? There's zero disagreement there. But it's not necessarily being talked about or handled differently than all the other compostables that might have other challenges. And so people really need to be looking out for themselves. And then, watching the NOP process from afar. We don't do federal policy, so I have not been involved. But, watching sort of the BPI folks, Alex and Rhodes, really put their heart and soul into it, and everybody else just kind of hoping it'll work out, which might not be fair. But, it seems like every company that's sitting in the room with Alex and Brian should be talking to the USDA once a week. No one else is going to take care of this for you, is I guess my point there. And the other point that I think that stakeholders should take into account is, I said this earlier, but I think we shouldn't assume each other's motivations. There's a lot of sort of echo chambers on both the product manufacturer side and the composter side, where the motivations of the other side are assumed to be something that they're not. And we actually have a lot of overlap. And whether that means, people think like, oh, it's just plastics industry wanting to sell more plastics, or the composters just, wanting to keep their monopoly, or what, hearing both sides of those conversations can be incredibly frustrating. And I think we have a lot more in common than we realize.
I'm sorry about that.
Oscar music to get off the stage.
Apparently. No, and I apologize.
Well, I thought that was just my outro music at this point. So
yeah, no, and I apologize, Nick. No, I am. Thank you very much, and I apologize for the music. But wanted to just emphasize something that you shared before we shift over to Brian, which is everybody here wears so many different hats. You all have so many different lived experiences and perspectives, and every single one of those perspectives is key for the entire system to really understand, what is the whole of what is needed in order to do something differently that works better. And so that's really why we've all come together, and why we're doing this series, and why we're doing this project. And so just really appreciate that highlight. Let's go to Brian next, and I promise I won't run Oscar music again.
Great.
Unless I need to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Nick captured what I was going to say really well. And I mean, what I would say in one sentence is just that, we need help. To two audiences, right? The first, I would say to brands, we really need brands to be at the table. When it comes to these regulations, when it comes to the legislation, we need you there. And the problem is, if you're not there, it's very hard for me as a resin producer to explain the entire process and say, this is why you need to do it, because it's going to affect all these restaurants, right? I mean, what you need is the restaurant to be there. You need the brands to be there. And you need the brand to say, hey, if this isn't a compliance pathway, I'm out of options. And they'll often say it to you in a room at a conference, but you need them to say it out loud. And you need to say that where the regulators are going to hear you and where the legislators are going to hear you. And to, everyone outside of brands, I would say oftentimes, a lot of companies, you have marketing folks, you have sales folks. I would really, and I'm biased here, right? But I would really suggest you consider, getting some policy folks on your team. Coming from an ag background, the title is "What's for dinner?" It's beef. And at the end of the day, if you don't have policy folks and you're relying on other folks to solve your problems, you're what's for dinner. You need to be at the table. And to Nick's point, you just cannot rely on everyone else to fix your problems. There's not enough of us. There's not. We need you there, and we need companies to invest in these people to help spread the message. I mean, going into next year, there's going to be EPR in a half dozen states. We need more people. We need more help. And so I just would encourage folks, your brands, your companies are at risk if you're not here at the table and if you're not advocating. So we need you, and we want you here. And, finally, I would say, when you look at the automotive industry, you look at different industries, they are united. They go in, they know what they want. They say, we want this one thing. And for our industry, oftentimes that's been a problem. We're not united. And so I would say, if you have a problem, keep it in the family. Come to this conference, come to this upcoming event in Denver. And, that's where we get to have these conversations. We can't have these disagreements out in public. It's not going to work. We're too small. There's too many forces against us. So we need to be united, and we need to work together. And if you want to fight, as my mom would always say, keep it in the family, do it at home.
Wonderful final remarks. Thank you, Brian, and echoing the essence and the spirit of this work. So We have now time for some Q&A, and I'm curious just to get a sense of the room, the in-person folks. If there are two people, we're going to be taking 2 questions at a time, alternating between in-room and online. If there are 2 folks in the room that have a question for any of our panelists, I would just love if you could come up to the microphones. There's a stand here. You can kind of get in line, and then we'll, if you want to direct it to a specific individual, or, we'll leave it open to see who wants to respond first.
Hi, this is Munir Izalalan from Eastman. This is a great panel, having decision makers and those that are faced with waste management in their regions. So the question for you is, how do you make the decision? Are you more involved in providing sustainable solution for your constituents that have to deal with organic waste, or trying to align with the interest of composters that are struggling with compostable material because they want to protect a product? I mean, is this composter really the right waste manager for the problems that you are facing? So basically, how do you go ahead and how do you go about making the decision between your constituents and composters? Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to jump in there. I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I don't know that I necessarily fully embrace the framing of constituents versus composters, but it really does point out that, and I guess I would throw it back to the industry to say, okay, I hear you, right? You've come up with something that's special. It's different than traditional, traditional plastics. There's something beneficial about it. We know that. Maybe the traditional composting, the food composting system isn't the right place for this stuff to go. But you got to help us come up with something alternative that could actually be, that is feasible, that we can do. And then we can help to direct your products in that direction where they're actually going to be utilized. So, to say that the composting industry should change its entire business model to be able to accept these bioplastics is probably a little unreasonable, but that doesn't mean that there's not if you're not able to meet their standards for food composting on a scalable basis, is there another path for your products that will still maintain circularity, and what can we do on our side to help facilitate that path? And that's a brainstorming question, I suppose, but one that I would ask.
And if I can jump in, yeah, I agree with Senator Allen. And furthermore, what is the highest and best use of food waste after feeding humans and feeding animals? In our state, and I'd say in many states, the ag states, we need the nutrients in the ag system. So if there's going to be innovation that could come where we could have, if you guys can come up with some innovation here for us, that's great. But from our perspective, compost is a very, very valuable stream that we want to preserve.
Any other panelists want to add on to this conversation before we move to the next question? Okay. I don't see anyone standing at the mic, so I'm going to go to, well, I see somebody coming up to the mic. Okay, we're going to take, yeah, let's go to you.
Hey, I think you're over here. Hey, I'm Sammy. I'm from EcoSave Zero Waste. I'm the Sustainability Programs Manager. I have a very unique role being able to train our distribution partners on what certified compostables are, who BPI is, and what we're trying to do to advocate. And I unfortunately won't be in Denver, but my Director of Sales, Gary Bilbrough, who's very well loved, who has done a lot for this industry. He sits on 3 different USCC state chapters. We do a lot of advocacy, and I did not sign up for that job when I was hired 4 years ago, right when the pandemic happened. We almost struggled quite a bit during the pandemic because, of course, we support indirectly a lot of restaurants that collect food scraps. And what's frustrating for me is that we have a great program for multi-residential buildings, for example, that we helped launch with the city of San Francisco in 2014. And I think I heard Nick mention, what are the role with compostable bags with food scraps collection? Well, we have stats, and it's on our case study blog, and it's just like we have this information, but I often find, at least in my role so far, that it falls on deaf ears. So, if you want to hear the fact that contamination fell to less than 1% after these programs were introduced, that participation rates went from 50% to 80% in all 4 buildings. And this is 2014, right? Like, this is kind of outdated now. So I've already reached out to Hillary, who presented this week from the city of San Francisco. She featured our multi-res bag dispenser, which is a cool tool to use in multi-residential buildings. Participation rates, like I said, went up, but residents were also way more satisfied. But one of the struggles is that if one of the building managers, if they leave the building or don't really care, like, that's where things can fall apart. And it's a very broken system in that way. However, we're still trying our best. We create signage for these programs. We've reached out to CalRecycle many times. So, what else can we do with the limited resources that we have as a smaller company? We're a compostable bag company that's not owned by a larger plastics company, but we care a lot. And we're here to ensure that food scraps don't end up in landfill, and that we help reduce contamination by increasing participation. So yeah, if there's another avenue for me to work on, places to send these reports and the satisfactory rates and this data, please let me know. Yeah.
Yeah, this question of where else to share this information. And it's such a great question in general, because as everybody here has access to different resources that you've been using within your own field of work. And so what is that hub? What could that look like? Where could those information and resources be shared so they're more visible? And if any of our panelists have ideas, would love to hear it.
Just a quick response of, I think people tend to discount any studies that are funded by an industry that has something to gain from the study. And not to say that, and I haven't seen your specific studies, I know I've seen ones from others in the industry. My guess is that any independent research will show very similar findings. And I think we need to do a little bit more of that. I think we need to have, in the case of California, maybe have our university system look at various interventions and see how they're working and not working. Because it's just so easy to discount anything coming from a manufacturer. But intuitively, there's no way it won't show what you're saying. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Any other comments on this one, Colin?
Yeah, I'll weigh in here, and I'm not sure don't get excited because I don't have like a direct solution here, but I would say that there's like 2 things that I think have been coming to light kind of in our work. And one is that, colloquially, I'll say that like my job is an organics therapist, right? Because what we are trying to do is we are trying to ask people to change behavior. And so I feel like that always requires 2 things. One is like listening, and the other is really trying to present whatever the argument is, tailor it to that audience. And so I think, and that takes time, right? And also like meeting with all the different impacted groups, it's much more compelling to be like, can I just do a Got Milk campaign and boom, bada bang, we're good? But I think really that what this work in terms of what I have been seeing is that it really feels like having a very tailored message to every independently impacted stakeholder has been the better way to kind of make progress, even though if they're small incremental steps.
Thank you, Colin. All right, so unless there are any other add-on comments, I'm going to move to a question from the virtual participants. And this one is from Brad Rogers, and he asks, how is Minnesota managing the NOP guidelines in their composting legislation? Can California learn from this?
Yeah, I would have to go back to our composters and understand better their different procedures compared to California. But, you know, compostable plastics are still on our accepted lists for our major composters. So I'd have to come back to everyone and let you all know.
And that's totally fine, because we have been in a pattern of collecting responses from panelists after, because usually we don't have time for this level of Q&A. So we'll make sure to get that answer back from Mallory.
Can I just say very quickly, a Minnesotan in the room who will remain nameless suggested that Minnesota composters, NOP is not a priority. You know, I think California's market is unique. And we heard from actually, there was a whole panel that talked about this earlier in our conference, that that is not something that composters outside of California are necessarily drawn to.
Interesting.
Good to know. All right, and I'll just go to one more here in the virtual, from the virtual participants. This is, what is the discussion / consideration on what the public will do if the endpoint is that there's no option for compostables, even bags, to maximize food scrap diversion in California? I have worked with many cities when the rules change, and I wondered about the sense of going backwards in 20+ years practices that the public and schools sustainability groups will feel about it, and what it will mean to solid waste regions, policymakers, and elected officials. This one's from Susan.
I can try there. Yeah. I mean, I think, to kind of what I said earlier, I mean, if the question is if what happens if they aren't an option, they don't work out. I think you're left with a lot of bad options. I think that's what you're left with, right? And I think that shows the importance of us trying to make this work, and trying to work collaboratively to figure out, you know, how we're going to do that. Because the alternatives aren't good. I mean, and the alternatives are what we've been trying to run away from for decades. And it's like, finally, we have this phenomenal alternative, which isn't perfect. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not going to be a solution to every item. You know, I don't want everything to become compostable, right? I mean, that's another BPI tenet, right? Is focusing on food contaminated items. But for where it's necessary and for where it is a better alternative, I think that's what we should move towards. And so I think it just, that question shows you, if you think about that bad future ahead of us, that bad alternative reality, we don't want to go there. And that shows the importance of working together and us having this upcoming meeting to figure out, you know, how do we avoid that? How do we make sure that doesn't happen? How do we make sure there is a future for these items?
I agree. I'll just say that I think a lot of these laws fall apart if there's no way for somebody to comply. And again, you can't get mad at a company for not complying if there's literally no tool for them to comply, right? I brought up this example on Tuesday, but I know there's a lot of folks who weren't there. We worked on another piece of legislation with Senator Allen a couple of years ago that directed state agencies and any vendors that operate on state facilities to only buy recyclable or compostable or reusable food serviceware. And it's actually a really big scope in California, because we have the community colleges, we have the state universities, we have state parks, state beaches, fairgrounds, etc. It's a very big scope. And the requirements are very similar to the requirements in SB 54, but the difference was that instead of it being requirements they have to, you know, or producers have to follow, it's the state coming up with a finite list, and every vendor has to order from that list. And the requirements are really strict, and there isn't a single hot coffee cup on the approved list. So every coffee shop that's located on a college campus has no way of legally selling to-go coffee. And because that is impossible, right? I mean, a coffee shop's not going to stop selling coffee. It means that the entire law can sort of be ignored, right? And you know, whether or not we have people following the law with regards to the coffee cups, the fact that it makes the entire policy seem optional undercuts the rest of the law as well.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. Others from California.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a tough issue because I think it gets back to all of our questions, right? I mean, obviously, it's a, you know, Nick is right. I mean, the flip side, of course, is, you know, the lack of compliance is based on kind of the reality of composting on the ground. And if they're not actually producing things that are truly compostable in a real world environment, what's the point of calling things compostable and biodegradable? You know, so this is the problem. I mean, you know, so when we need material that's actually going to break down in the correct environment, then labeling is going to be key to ensure that consumers know what to do with the material. You know, I mean, I guess, you know, one thing I would ask, you know, I kind of maybe in the end we can color code things for cups or for straws. You know, green straw could mean it's compostable, so it would send like signals to consumers that people would know and be able to easily recognize as we try to shift the culture. But yeah, I mean, I know we gotta like, I mean, ultimately we've got to figure out a way to maybe, you know, in the words of Matt Damon, to science the F out of this, to, you know, to try to figure out how to really make this work on the ground. And because the reason why so many of these products are not you know, kind of covered under the current regs is just because of the fact that they're not really compostable in real world conditions. Again, you know, if there's some other system we can create that would be able to funnel these products toward another good use, let's have that conversation and try to figure out a system that would help with that. Otherwise, we got to figure out how to use the existing system, and that's the massive challenge we have here. You know, that's the massive challenge we have. I mean, I remember Nick. I remember we were talking about, you know, I guess we went to, there was some facility I think we went to in West Sacramento, and, you know, we were concerned there was one bioplastics producer that was decided to go into water bottles, which is the one type of plastic that is actually getting recycled in California, the one type of virgin kind of fossil fuel plastic. And I think your point at the time was, you know, let them focus on things where we actually don't have good recycling rates. So, you know, again, this is gonna, I think you just have a lot of people who have stepped into this space, have some good technology, and just kind of expect the system to somehow find a way to make their products work. And unfortunately, we're just talking about such massive scale here, and the systems associated with mass composting are so massive. I mean, maybe there's a promise in the work that Ridwell and some of these other groups are doing, you know, that they've got some interesting models that involve kind of separate collection that doesn't send the stuff into the big system. I don't know. These are going to have to be, we're going to have to figure this out. And I guess we've got some good science and technologists who are involved here that will help us with that. But, you know, but it's not going to be, the answer is not to just continue to produce products that are not fossil fuel based, but that aren't breaking down in the regular composting system and sending them into the regular composting system. That's not a good solution either.
That's great.
I'd like to just add one thing. I think sympathize with the challenges, but I do want to disagree a little bit with the suggestion that the reason these products aren't working is because they're not breaking down. Study after study is showing that they do break down in well-managed systems. The issue in California is that if you're a composter and you take these coffee cups, for example, that renders your compost ineligible for organic agriculture. So that, I think, that just to make sure that we're concentrating on the right obstacles, you know, I think I would.
So
make
what
that
you're saying is it's a question of the application of the definition of organics that's being pushed down by CalRecycle onto the composters. Is that your point? Alex?
Yeah, more or less. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about it. Let's see what we could do. I mean, if there's some way that we can make the case to Cal Recycle that, that these particular types of cups, for example, are not, not jamming up the kind of industrial composting work, and it's really demonstrable. We should be able to make that case. I mean, they clearly have a different opinion, but let's work on it.
Well, and
So-
yeah, go ahead, Ariel.
No, I was going to move us to one final question. So why don't you go?
Yeah, well, and I just want to be sensitive. I know for our Midwest and East Coast folks who are joining us that we are getting into the after work hours into the evening. And so I don't want to go too much longer, but did also want to give an opportunity for one last question. We can see if there's anybody live in the room that wants to step up and come ask. And then we are going to close this incredible conversation. All right. Looks like we've got a question.
Hello, my name is Chris Cooperine, and I am with NatureWorks. And I just want to speak to Ben directly. Closed Loop Partners has done a fantastic job of finding information and doing the research, testing 23,000 pieces of compostable products, and found that 99% of them break down in well-managed systems. The biggest issue that's going on right now when it comes to this NOP, which is very, very important and a very real market issue in California, is that it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody else in the rest of the country. And when you are the tip of the sword, you forget the distance to the hilt. We are trying to write legislation that will be modeled in other states. And so in looking at that, I would just implore you to look at some of the data that they came up with that substantiates what's going on, how these materials behave, because the consensus is that the certified compostable products behave as intended. With that, the complication of the NOP is it essentially creates a kosher kitchen where everything has to be separated, and it doubles the work, the operations, the input and processing times, and everything else that goes into it. So please look into the closed loop study, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the as a fellow member of the tribe, I appreciate the kosher kitchen illusion, because I know how hard that can be to manage. Yeah, we'll take a look at it. I mean, obviously we need to all collectively take another run at Cal Recycle. I mean, I think and Nick knows I've had my challenges with them too. There's a rigidity there sometimes. There's new leadership. But let's take another run at them. Let's see what we can do to try to figure this out. Because look, at the end of the day, the central point that Nick was making is correct. We've got to figure out a way to encourage this work. And if we keep closing the door all the time, then the innovation will cease. So this is gonna involve some work on all of our parts. And so let's do some collaboration. I noticed the note in the what's in Denver? Someone says asking me if I'm going to go to Denver.
Yeah, so this conversation today is a part of a whole system strategic planning process. And so this is the long discovery process leading into a whole system strategic plan. And so there's a microcosm of the system coming together in Denver on the 23rd through the 26th through a guided and structured strategic planning process. And out of that, we are going to identify a common ground agenda that everybody's ready and willing to work together on. And so that was going to be how we were going to close today, which is letting folks know that the window is closing to be one of those incredible participants. We have a really great group of people coming together. There are room for a few more. And so if you can be with us, the future search process is extraordinary. And so looking forward. Yeah,
I think it conflicts with Climate Week, I think, but I'll go check that out. But maybe we can send somebody. But I do want to. I hope I didn't mean to be. I guess I'm trying to maybe parrot some of the perspective of the folks in the administration. I don't want to. I'm very sympathetic to the industries that are represented here. I don't mean to sound too discouraging. I mean, in the end, I truly believe that we have to find a path for you. I'm glad we're in this dialogue, and I want to have a smaller brainstorm session with a few folks to see how we can make a run at this. I think it's going to take a little time, but I'm looking forward to that, because I think at the end of the day, the work that's happening with all of your companies is vitally important. It's going to be the only way that we're going to take this whole process to the next level and make the cups truly recyclable, make all the foodware and all the products that you're producing truly compostable. So I look forward to that dialogue.
That's great. Well, and that is a wonderful place for us to close today. Just sitting with incredible appreciation for everybody who came today in the audience, both live and in the Zoom space, all of our amazing panelists to come and share your stories, which is such an amazing part of really helping everybody understand what's real in every part of the system. And so just wanted to share appreciation. If you would like to join us for the strategic planning event in about a week and a half, let us know in the next couple of days, and we would love to have you join us. So just wanted to share our appreciation for everybody that participated in the series. Part of this purpose of the series is to create a library of resources of the different perspectives of all of the stakeholders in the system. And so that library lives on YouTube in a public channel and is available for anybody to access. And so we have 14 of these, including today, coming from all the different perspectives in the system. And so an incredible resource there. Really hope that you have enjoyed today. We have loved having all of you and look forward to the conversation in a couple of weeks. After the strategic planning event, again, this is a 2-year project. This event is at the center point. We are going to build a common ground agenda and action plans and come back out to the whole U.S. composting community and share what people developed and talk about how to get involved. So looking forward to doing that as well. Thank you to each and all of you, and appreciate your interest, appreciate your energy and your passion. I think the takeaway from this conversation for me was how important innovation is in thinking about what is the future you want for the circularity of compostables and compost. And so that's what we'll be working on together. So thank you all very much. Ariel, anything you want to part with?
Nope, just appreciate everyone's real dialogue today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this session will be posted on the website later today. Thank you.